listen to standing topics. Keith, send me your playlist. Listen to stand.
Or you start to no problem.
No.
I want to give myself a slow.
Yeah, oh, that, yeah.
It's almost a university.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I think I was the one that stood out to me.
Yeah, he liked it, huh? That's a great job. Where's he from?
Hey, Neha.
Hey,
Morning. Aw, yeah. Oh, I didn't. Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's like warm. It's nice to keep your hair. Yeah, I'm looking forward to your. Yeah, so. But I think it'll be.
Yeah, we'll get started.
All right, everybody. I see we're all moving closer to the table, so let's get started in a minute. I'll let everyone grab their final cups of coffee, the final bites of their bagel.
What's happening? Morning is right now. Feel happy. Yeah. No, about 5 or 6.
All right, so let's get started. It's a couple minutes after 10:30. Just want to thank everybody for coming to the third week of the Summer Freedom School organized by the Saturday Free School and Mother Bethel Church. We've spent now 2 weeks into this Freedom School, the first week being King's Birmingham campaign in 1963, and explicitly, why do you see it as a revolution? Why must we see it as a revolution? And then last week we were talking about the necessity for the Black church to play a revolutionary role if it is to have a future, learning from its role in the Birmingham campaign. And then third week, this week, we just wanted to lift up the role of those thousands of children who marched in Birmingham, who went to jail, who faced the police dogs and faced the water hoses. And it was really they who decided the fate of the civil rights movement. It was they who saved the movement from failure. It's the reason why, children were the reason why we hear about Martin Luther King Jr. today, instead of that movement fading into history. And so it really was that much of a do or die moment in Birmingham, and that's why we really wanted to take week 3 of this movement, of this Freedom School, to really focus on this. And I think we'll be able to see from the materials that we'll present today that Birmingham was really a very high stakes moment because, Birmingham is known as Bombingham for a reason. Anytime Black folks spoke up, their houses were bombed in the middle of the night by Klansmen. I think it was very much on everyone's minds how dangerous of a moment it was, and then also that to actually be able to speak up, it was going to require a lot of courage. And so King really was hoping to mobilize as many people as possible, but all the adults a month into the campaign who said they would go to jail had already gone to jail. They were out of people who had signed up, and so they were at a crossroads. So they decided to turn to the children. They took the leap and saw that the capacity of the children were perhaps higher than even the adults, and that the children were the ones that actually might have the courage to take those courageous leaps of faith that the adults needed. And so it was indeed that, in the words of James Bethel in the movement, that a child, if they're old enough to be baptized, that they were ready to be a freedom fighter. And it was children that signed up for the nonviolent workshops. They signed pledge cards. They prepared themselves to go to jail, to face police dogs, and ultimately, it was they took up the struggle for freedom and broke the back of white supremacy in Birmingham. And so the reason why we're talking about it today is what from that example, those highly conscious, highly decisive, highly courageous children can actually teach us about the capacity of young people in facing the crisis that we find ourselves in today. And something that we've been wondering actually as we started this Freedom School is what makes a Birmingham child all that different than a child in Philadelphia today? What have we actually tried in the 21st century to turn Philadelphia into a Birmingham style campaign? And would that actually require us to see children a little differently than we have been seeing them before? And so, in the first 2 weeks of this Freedom School, and even before this, we were thinking about this question a lot because the question of children just always came up. And I think it is because children are always on our minds. I mean, we live in the city. We know that they are facing so much. The schools, the society, which is at war, which impoverishes the people and leaves so little future for children. That is something that, we all feel very existentially. But there are times when I get the feeling that, we get this feeling of like, how do we save the children? What is it about children that is a problem to be solved for today? And there's a side to it that I also just think that, the bigger question is also, children, are they just passive victims of this crisis? Or is it that them experiencing the brunt of this crisis, knowing what they face every day going to the schools, knowing what they see in the streets, do they have a diagnosis of the crisis today? And do they also feel that they don't want to accept the world that they live in, and instead actually they would, if given the chance, they would take up the struggle for freedom? And so that's something that I think we want to be able to, open up our thinking, focus on in our discussion, because I do think that children have that natural human instinct towards solidarity towards other people, especially other children. I mean, what child wants to see, whether they're in Birmingham, other children getting hurt by bombs in Birmingham, or today, 2,000-pound bombs dropped in Gaza and Iran? Like, what child wants to see that and would accept that? I think children actually have a lot to teach us in terms of their natural moral instincts to be able to, reject injustice and to be able to take up the struggle against war and poverty and racism. And it just shows that, in Birmingham, children were the vanguard, and they showed the example that the adults needed. And so do we today have something to learn from the way that children want to make their communities a better and safer place to live? Because I say all that to say the way we approach children and this question of young people is really going to determine, our revolutionary possibilities and imagination for the future ahead. And so these are all just questions I think would be really worth keeping in mind as we move into our program for today. We will be listening to 2 songs curated by Tony Montero. One of them is actually from a recording of a Birmingham mass meeting after the first day in which 1,000 children had marched in the streets of Birmingham, and many of them were in jail at that point. So many of the people in attendance of this meeting were there to listen to King, to listen to Abernathy, but also to hear freedom songs. And so we actually have a recording from one of those portions of that meeting, and we get to hear a little bit of that song that was sung there. And it's called "I'm on My Way to Freedom's Land." And then the second song to be paired with it is, Otis Redding's "A Change Is Gonna Come." And so followed by that, we will be watching 20 minutes from a documentary called Eyes on the Prize, which focuses on the Children's Crusade. We watched many different documentaries trying to find the right one to view for today, because many people have tried to make documentaries on this history, but we felt that this one was the best one because they took the children seriously. They used music and the way they cut that historic footage in a way that actually elevates the children instead of making it, trivializing it or making it something where, children just cutting class or children were just, listening to the DJs and, finding their way to the streets. Like, instead, we really wanted this documentary that we're going to watch today to tell that story, because even the music you'll hear was put together by Bernice Reagan Johnson. Reagan Johnson, who I think in the past weeks we've heard some selections of her music or from her group Symphony of Rock. So she was the music consultant on Eyes on the Prize. After that, we'll open the discussion with some remarks from Tony Montero. And then, oh yes, and then we're going to read, after the documentary, we will be hearing from Blaise Laramie, who will be reading about 3 pages from King's Why We Can't Wait, talking about the role of children in chapter 6 of that book. And then we'll be having Tony open the discussion, for which at that point we would love everyone to participate.
You can do it to turn me around. You can do it. You can do it.
Right. Ooh, yes, it's you are living for. I'm waiting down. What's up there? Beyond the glass. It's never long time coming. No, just got gone. Oh, yeah. I'll go to my brother. We got just gonna come. Oh, yes. See, I went to my little
Good.
Yeah. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice Too long delayed is justice denied.
As King sat in Birmingham jail, the demonstration lost support. 8 days after his arrest, King accepted release on bond and the next project. It would be the most controversial yet.
Once you get the black community in Birmingham, when you get people involved, get the children involved.
We were taking the kids out of school, March, and I thought that was unnecessary. In fact, mine was kids really didn't know what it was all about. So,
Most adults have bills to pay, house notes, rents, car notes, utility bills, but the young people, where they can think at the same level, are not at this point who put all those responsibilities. So a boy from high school, he get the same effect in terms of being in jail, to put pressure on the city as his father, and yet he's not. There's no economic threat on the family because the father's still on the job.
The day the children began to march. At first, the groups were small. Police and arrested them, loaded them in padlocks and took them away to Birmingham jail. As the children continued to march in precincts, others became inactive. Finally, school buses were brought in to gather the demonstrators.
Nothing you can do. Nothing you can do.
By the end of that Thursday, 700 children were taken to Birmingham jail. Friday, more than 1,000 children stayed out of school and arrived at the 16th Street Church to march. Will Connor tried to stop the marches before they began and brought out the city's police dogs. Next, the fire department was brought in and Will Connor ordered water hoses turned on the demonstrators. With 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, the water picked up enough force to knock the bark off free. As water pounded the demonstrators, David Van was on the phone against.
He was expressing resentment about King coming in and messing up the thing just when we were getting a new start. And then he said to me, he said, but all you did, said they've turned fire hoses on black. They were rolling in here right out of the street. And I can't.
on my building, looking down on Blue Continental Street Water, and the park right across from my office there, in that park. That's the most outstanding thing about it. I just couldn't.
Will Connor's going to patrol the city streets as the fire hoses stopped the demonstrators. The sun came down in the trees of Kelly Indian Park. Others followed from the front. The conflict gained national attention, and news coverage of the event shocked the American public.
A masterpiece of the use of media to explain a cause to the general public of the nation. Because in those days you had 15 minutes of national news and 15 minutes of local news. And in marching only one block, they could get enough news film to fill all of the newscasts all of the legislation in the United States.
Photographs appeared in newspapers throughout the world, and the Birmingham story was told in many languages. The Russian newspaper Pravda ran a cartoon of police intimidating a black child. The federal government worried about America's image in other parts of the world. Governors saw it differently.
It seems that other parts of the world ought to be concerned about what we think of them instead of what they think of us. After all, we're the people. And whenever they start rejecting 25 cents of each dollar for aid money we send to them, then I'll be concerned about their attitude toward us. But until they reject that 25 cents out of each dollar that Southern taxpayers pay for foreign aid to these countries, I will never be concerned about their attitude. In the first place, the average man in Africa and Asia doesn't even know where he is, much less where Alabama is.
On Saturday, the dogs and water boosters provoked angry responses from bystanders, some of them carrying weapons. Seeing the beginnings of violence, James Bethel borrowed a bullhorn from a nearby policeman.
So I took the board and said, okay, get off the street. We're not going to violence. We're not going to stick policemen. You're not going to be in the movement. You know. So it's strange, I guess, to them. I'm with the police talking through the bullhorn and giving orders to everybody. You know, it was like, wow. But what I thought was at stake was the possibility of a riot. And that once in movement, once a riot breaks out, you have to stop. It takes you 4 or 5 more days to get released established. And I was trying to avoid that kind of situation.
Monday, the 5th day of the children's campaign. Comedian Dick Gregory arrived in Birmingham and marched with the young demonstrators. Like hundreds before him, he was arrested. Law enforcement officials were working overtime to keep up with the arrest.
There was no such thing as off days. They were 7 days. Sleeping cabinet, just holding fire. We all had to confirm belief that this couldn't go on for long because it pressed the issue too long.
The confrontation moved outside the park. Once again, Bull Connor summoned his firemen. There's no place to run, no trees for protection. The demonstrators were hit with the full force of the war. By Monday night, 2,500 demonstrators had been arrested, over 2,000 of them children. All jails in the city and county were filled.
At one time, I had, here in this building, 8, 7, 8, 4, we had 1,200 male juvenile. Wow. On top of it, probably near 1,000. At the same time, I had 600 females, 4 each dormitory. That's fair.
Meanwhile, the Justice Department tried to move negotiations forward.
I participated in all of, in order to try to get some kind of agreement between people that often wouldn't talk to each other at all. I don't mean that the blacks wouldn't talk to anybody, but I mean there were many whites that wouldn't talk to any blacks, and there were many more whites that wouldn't talk to certain blacks, and there were no whites, I think, except for David Vann, who would talk to Martin King.
Tuesday, May 2nd, fighting broke out between blacks and downtown. Bert Marshall and the business leaders adjusted and pushed it into the floor. The situation was fast reaching the wire proportions James Bethel had feared. The businessmen quickly returned to negotiations, ready to talk.
So we began hammering what the problems were. You gotta recognize one, that we don't have them. We got 2 elements, neither of them can be effective. We've got to find a way to work this thing out within private sector
4 bands. Both sides agreed to a day of truce. A resolution was reached, but there was a last-minute hitch.
It's reached the settlement. And it looks like tomorrow, but said we're gonna take down the signs. We have a 60-day cooling off period, and desegregate lunch counters, and begin a program of employment down in Birmingham with at least 3 clerks. I think somebody in New York asked Reverend Shuttlesworth, why he would settle for just 3 clerks and down in Birmingham. He said, I've been 3 years. And the thing almost came unglued. By that time, Reverend Shuttlesworth was so worked up that I can remember Fred Cousin and David Van crying. And it just seemed like when David Van wanted to settle, Fred wasn't ready to settle.
Well, you must remember that there's always some disagreement when it looks as if you're not getting what you're aiming at. And there are people who want victories, social victories to come quickly.
On Friday, May 10th, 38 days after Project C began, an agreement was reached with the business community. Reverend Shuttlesworth had been right. When the movement came to Birmingham, it won a much-needed victory and it gained national attention. The next night, the Ku Klux Klan met outside the city, and Grand Dragon Robert Shelton gave this opinion of the Birmingham agreement.
No business people in Birmingham or any other city has the authority to attempt any type of negotiation on the things and governmental affairs of the municipality. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, epitaph to be with me here in Birmingham.
Several hours later, a bomb exploded outside Martin Luther King's room at the Gaston Motel. King had already left Birmingham. No one was in the room at the time. As a large crowd gathered, the Alabama State Police moved in and began beating blacks with clubs and rifles. In response, angry black rioted and set fire to several buildings. Over the next few weeks, the riots that began in Birmingham spread to other cities. Racial tensions gripped the country, and President Kennedy was moved to action. On June 11th, he took a stronger position than any president since Lincoln, calling civil rights a moral issue.
Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill the promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cry for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fire of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions, threaten violence, and threaten lives. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act. To make a commitment it is not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
Kennedy pushed for a new civil rights bill, but was troubled when the movement announced plans for a mass march on Washington. Fearing more violence, Attorney General Robert Kennedy had tried to prevent the march without success.
There will be a mass march. There is no doubt about it. It's our purpose and our hope that this march will carry on in a manner that will be definitely and effectively in support of the civil rights program.
Bring our hope and cheer, requesting all citizens to move into Washington.
The movement had grown to mobilize the militants now set outside to mobilize the nation. Across the country, people made plans to attend the march on Washington, demonstrating for jobs and freedom. Among the thousands who traveled to Washington, there were black and white activists, labor leaders, clergy, and Hollywood stars.
The name of this state. They came in jalopies, on trains, buses, anything they could get. Some walked.
Myron Ruskin was the master organizer behind the day's events, coordinating hundreds of details. Volunteers painted signs to state the issue. They made 80,000 cheese sandwiches to feed the march. Security was carefully set up so violence would not mark the day. As the day began, march organizers worried that the turnout would not be large enough to attract the nation's attention. By early afternoon, more than 200,000 people gathered for the symbolic march from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. It was a tremendous day for Mr. Lincoln, who first proposed the idea for such a march in 1941 during Franklin Roosevelt's administration. The speech that captured the nation's attention was the stirring oratory of Martin Luther King.
So from the let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring from the high mountains of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the SoCal, Colorado. Let freedom ring from the very slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from the hill and the hill of Mississippi. From every mountain. When we let it ring from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day with all and Jews and Gentiles, Muslims and Catholics, women and hands, and singing the words of the equal spiritual freedom. Thank God.
Days after the March on Washington, Birmingham, Alabama, a bomb exploded in the 16th Street Baptist Church just before a Sunday morning service. 15 people were injured. 4 children were killed. The murder of these children shook the nonviolent movement to its core. As the people buried their dead, they sang, "We shall overcome." In anger and in rage, many wondered how.
I guess we can move next to the reading portion where we'll hear from Blaze. Oh, Doc. Okay, let's do the reading first. That's good. So, we've read from this before in previous weeks. This is King's Why We Can't Wait. He reflects on the Birmingham movement just months after it takes place, and it's published a year after 1963. This is chapter 6, Black and White Together. We just chose these passages because I think just hearing how King describes the role and how he went through the decision of why go to the children of Birmingham at that do or die moment of this campaign. And I think it's really worth just hearing those words, hearing King's words. And yeah, we're very grateful to Blaze to be able to hear these words spoken aloud.
Black and white together. After 8 days of imprisonment, Ralph Abernathy and I accepted bond to come out of jail for 2 purposes. It was necessary for me to regain communication with the SCLC officers and our lawyers in order to map the strategy for the contempt cases that would be coming up shortly in the circuit court. Also, I had decided to put into operation a new phase of our campaign, which I felt would speed victory. I called my staff together and repeated a conviction I had been voicing ever since the campaign began. If our drive is to be successful, we must involve the students of the community. In most of the recent direct action crusades, it had been the young people who sparked the movement. But in Birmingham, of the first 400 or 500 people who had submitted themselves to arrest, 2/3 had been adults. We had considered this a good thing at the time, for a really effective campaign incorporates a cross-section of the community. But now it was time to enlist the young people in larger numbers. Even though we realized that involving teenagers and high school students would bring down upon us a heavy fire of criticism, we felt that we needed this dramatic new dimension. Our people were demonstrating daily and going to jail in numbers, but we were still beating our heads against the brick wall of the city officials' stubborn resolve to maintain the status quo. Our fight, if won, would benefit people of all ages, but most of all, we were inspired with a desire to give to our young a true sense of their own stake of freedom and justice. We believed they would have the courage to respond to a call. James Bethel, Andy Young, Bernard Lee, and Dorothy Cotton began visiting colleges and high schools in the area. They invited students to attend after-school meetings at churches. The word spread fast, and the response from Birmingham's youngsters exceeded our fondest dreams. By the 50s and by the 100s, these youngsters attended mass meetings and training sessions. They listened eagerly as we talked of bringing freedom to Birmingham, not in some distant time, but right now. We taught them the philosophy of nonviolence. We challenged them to bring their exuberance, their youthful creativity, into the disciplined dedication of the movement. We found them eager to belong, hungry for participation in a significant social effort. Looking back, it is clear that the introduction of Birmingham's children into the campaign was one of the wisest moves we made. It brought a new impact to the crusade and the impetus that we needed to win the struggle. Immediately, of course, a cry of protest went up. Almost by the end of April, the attitude of the national press had changed considerably, so that the major media were according us sympathetic coverage. Yet many deplored our abusing our children in this fashion. Where had these writers been, we wondered, during the centuries when our segregated social system had been misusing and abusing Negro children? Where had they been with their protective words when, down through the years, Negro infants were born into ghettos, taking their first breath of life in a social atmosphere where the fresh air of freedom was crowded out by the stench of discrimination? The children themselves had the answer to the misguided sympathies of the press. One of the most ringing replies came from a child of no more than 8 who walked with her mother one day in a demonstration. An amused policeman leaned down to her and said with mock gruffness, "What do you want?" The child looked into his eyes, unafraid, and gave her answer. "Freedom," she said. She could not even pronounce the word, but no Gabriel trumpet could have sounded a truer note. Even children too young to march requested and earned a place in our ranks. Once, when we sent out a call for volunteers, 6 tiny youngsters responded. Andy Young told them that they were not old enough to go to jail, but that they could go to the library. "You won't get arrested there," he said, "but you might learn something." So these 6 small children marched up to the building in their white district, where up to 2 weeks before, they would have been turned away at the door. Shyly but doggedly, they went to the children's room and sat down, and soon they were lost in their books. In their own way, they had struck a blow for freedom. The children understood the stakes they were fighting for. I think of one teenage boy whose father's devotion to the movement turned sour when he learned that his son had pledged himself to become a demonstrator. The father forbade his son to participate. "Daddy," the boy said, "I don't want to disobey you, but I have made my pledge. If you try to keep me home, I will sneak off. If you think I deserve to be punished for that, I'll just have to take the punishment. For you see, I'm not doing this only because I'm doing it also because I want freedom for you and Mom, and I want it to come before you die." That father thought again and gave his son his blessing. The movement was blessed by the fire and excitement brought to it by young people such as these. And when Birmingham youngsters joined the march in numbers, a historic thing happened. For the first time in the civil rights movement, we were able to put into effect the Gandhian principle, "fill up the jails." Jim Bethel had the inspiration of setting a D-Day when the students would go to jail in historic numbers. When that day arrived, young people converged on the 16th Street Baptist Church in wave after wave. Altogether, on D-Day, May 2nd, more than 1,000 young people demonstrated and went to jail. At one school, the principal gave orders to lock the gates to keep the students in. The youngsters climbed the gates and ran toward freedom. The assistant superintendent of schools threatened them with expulsion, and still they came, day after day. At the height of the campaign, by conservative estimates, there were 2,500 demonstrators in jail at one time, a large proportion of them young people. Serious as they were about what they were doing, these teenagers had that marvelous humor that arms the unarmed in the face of danger. Under their leaders, they took delight in confusing the police. A small decoy group would gather at one exit of the church, bringing policemen streaming in cars and on motorcycles. Before the officers knew what was happening, other groups by the scores would pour out of other exits and move, 2 by 2, toward our goal in the downtown section. Many arrived at their destination before the police could confront and arrest them. They sang as they marched, and as they were loaded into the paddy wagons. The police ran out of paddy wagons and had to press sheriff's cars and school buses into service. Watching those youngsters in Birmingham, I could not help remembering an episode in Montgomery during the bus boycott. Someone had asked an elderly woman why she was involved in our struggle. I'm doing it for my children and for my grandchildren, she had replied. And 7 years later, the children and grandchildren were doing it for themselves.
Thank you, Blaze. I should have said at the beginning also, Blaze is a teacher of children under 3 years old, is that right? Yeah.
18 months.
18 months old. But your daily experiences with like children, even at that age, and their consciousness and their natural instincts for morality has really been an inspiration for us, and also evidence we mean by their revolutionary potential and capacity. And then now we'll hear from Dr. Montero to help us open the discussion.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here, very emotional, of course, watching the films and listening to the music. Alice told me I should speak up. Sometimes I think I talk too loud. But it's a very emotional time, but learning carries emotion with it. First of all, I just want to say a couple things about the purpose of studying history and why we are here. There's several reasons that I'd like to identify. The first one is a lot of people want to know history because they want to know the facts of history, to be knowledgeable of history, and to be able to share their knowledge with younger people and with their neighbors and friends and church colleagues. The second is people want to study history because they want to help through the knowledge they have of elevating the consciousness of our people. The third, and I think this is the purpose that we are doing this summer school, is to know and to investigate a significant moment in our and in world history in order to elevate ours and the people's consciousness, and to use this consciousness as an instrument to go forward in the ongoing struggle against injustice, poverty, criminalization, gentrification, and literally for the freedom of the people. In other words, to complete what was begun in Birmingham in 1963. But this is a process by which we must do a critical interrogation or investigation of this moment in history. I say this because there are many interpretations of the civil rights movement and of Birmingham in particular. And if Birmingham and knowledge of it is to be an instrument in the struggle for freedom today, in a city like Philadelphia, I think it is necessary that we reinterpret what exactly happened there. But then there are other questions that I think have come up over these last 2 weeks. First among them, why are we studying Birmingham? Why not Montgomery? Why not Albany? Why not Selma? Why not the Freedom Rides? Why not Memphis? Why not the student sit-ins in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1960? Or the student sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee in 1961? Or the Freedom Rides? Or the voter registration campaigns in Mississippi? Why are we looking at Birmingham? But then other questions arise. Why have we singled out Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth and Dorothy Cotton and Wyatt T. Walker and C.T. Vivian, among others? Why are we focusing upon the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and not upon the NAACP or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee or the Congress of Racial Equality? And why have we made the Black church so significant? And I guess the first question that we put on the table in the first session is, was Birmingham the beginning of a revolution, and was Martin Luther King a revolutionary? And I think the way we answer those two questions will decide in large measure, first of all, the way we see Birmingham and the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and the way we see the possible deployments of the lessons of that struggle for today. As we've said, I think last week, for Martin Luther King, well, first of all, let me just say this. I think we begin with, I think it's more than an assumption, it's a belief based upon evidence that Martin Luther King was indeed a revolutionary. I think all historical evidence, all arguments to the contrary, cannot undermine this fact. Martin Luther King was a revolutionary. But if we needed any further evidence, Martin Luther King called himself a revolutionary. His colleagues, closest colleagues in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, by this I'm talking about Abernathy, I'm talking about Shuttlesworth, Wyatt T. Walker, C.T. Vivian, Dorothy Cotton, Diane Nash, Coretta Scott King, and others saw themselves as revolutionaries. In other words, they saw the struggle that they were leading as a struggle to bring about fundamental change in the United States. The other thing is that Martin Luther King saw the Birmingham movement beginning in the late winter, early spring of 1963 as the real start of the civil rights movement, or what he called the Third American Revolution. I hope that we absorb and take seriously how King identified Birmingham and how he identified himself and how he identified the task force. As we said last week, King and others in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were hesitant about going into Birmingham. Fred Shuttlesworth had been calling upon FCLC, come to Birmingham. The struggle in Birmingham will decide the civil rights movement. This will be the decisive battle. King and others in the FCLC and the civil rights movement broadly knew that Birmingham was the most violent country in the city, known as Birmingham. To go into Birmingham meant to get involved in a struggle unlike any other that the civil rights movement had been involved in. They also knew that the future of the SCLC, and as it would turn out, of Martin Luther King himself, would be decided in Birmingham. And therefore, the Birmingham movement was existential for them. Had they failed in Birmingham, there would have been no March on Washington in August 1963 as we know it today. There may have been a civil rights law passed, but it would not have been the comprehensive bill that it turned out to be. Most importantly for me, and I hope for you, the world would have never known the full measure of the great revolutionary and genius of Martin Luther King Jr. Besides the danger of violence, they also had to face the fact that the black church and the black pulpit was divided. There were still wounds, if you remember us talking last week about the National Baptist Convention of 1961, where a group of progressive and revolutionary pastors by Martin Luther King, but also including the brilliant Gardner Taylor. I'm sorry. Gardner Taylor, who the SDLC advanced to become the president. Who they advanced to become the president of the National Baptist Convention. And they wanted to take over the leadership of the National Baptist Convention in order to deploy it, this largest of black organizations, in the cause of civil rights and freedom. They failed. The wounds were deep. They would affect the pulpit in Birmingham. So when King talks about the 6 white moderates, we can also assume that he was talking about a lot more black moderates in the pulpit who opposed King coming into Birmingham. Let me just move on. I just want to get to this point. So I say all of that to say that a lot rested upon Birmingham. A lot rested upon the churches in Birmingham. And this is a question we tried to think about last week. Can the black church be a force for revolutionary and progressive change? And that is a question mark. Just a quick thing, King, in the letter from a Birmingham jail, the Sermon on Knock at midnight, makes the point that when the institutional church, the church of buildings and stained glass windows and great oratory and great music cannot move, he would look to the spiritual church, the church upon which the buildings must be built. He called this a new ecclesia. I just want to underline that where we have been. Now, Birmingham was existential. It was a do or die campaign, as I've tried to point out. But Birmingham is called the Children's Campaign. The Birmingham movement was saved by children and youth. Connect the dots. The existential moment in the civil rights movement is decided by what children and young people did. James Bethel in the documentary said, I thought it was very interesting, that the children pretty much had the same consciousness as their parents without the burden of mortgages and jobs and other things. I think he's partially right. I think, in fact, the children came to the front of the struggle. They became the vanguard of the struggle. They became the decisive force which saved the civil rights movement and made possible the March on Washington. How is this possible? It means, I think, it becomes possible and understandable if we critically interrogate some or many of our assumptions about what the child is. You know, I guess we all have stories of our childhood that have stayed with us all of our lives. I got two. I'm not going to go into them. And if I think about it, maybe the children of Birmingham were also thinking about these things. You know, my family is from South Carolina, my maternal side. And we all lived in a house on North 13th Street in North Philadelphia. Grandmother, great uncles, my mother, my uncles and aunts, and my brother and I. And I used to always, at 3 or 4, hear them talking about colored people. Colored people. This happened to colored people. That happened to colored people. And I remember this as though it happened yesterday. I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. And I asked my grandmother, I said, Nanny, are we colored people? And she said, yes. And therefore, I knew then that I was a part of an oppressed group of people. This is at 3 or 4 years old, which was defining. The other defining moment, and these are the two things that I remember most about my childhood, was when I was 10 years old and the assassination of Emmett Till.
Yes.
It's unforgettable. So these two childhood events determine my consciousness for the rest of my life. But also, these were events that were preparing me for struggle. And I would say at 4 years old, when my grandmother said, we are colored people, we are oppressed people, I was ready at that point for struggle. I could have marched or whatever, or gone to jail, because I knew I was an oppressed person, and as an oppressed Black person with a child's mind, a child's purity of the sense of justice, of right and wrong, that's untarnished, unstained by compromise. I was ready for struggle. And then, of course, at 10, seeing the mutilated and disfigured body of Emmett Till, I could have marched forever. So, already at this young child's age, I had the consciousness of a person who would fight for freedom. And I'm certain I wasn't the only one. But then what is a child? And what is youth? I would say, and this is just a rough estimate perhaps, that childhood, we can measure childhood from the ages of 3 to about 16. Youth from about 18 to 29. So when we look at those videos of children marching out of the 16th Street Baptist Church, disciplined, 2 by 2, marching to the center of the city, prepared to face dogs and water hoses and the police, but most significantly, to go to jail, we are not looking at something unusual. That is the level of consciousness that children have. And I agree with James Bethel. Their consciousness was not that different from their parents, and in many ways could have exceeded their parents' consciousness. But like a child, they had a stronger moral commitment than many adults have. Just a quick thing. In Birmingham, and I wish to make this point clear, in Birmingham, the children went to the vanguard. When they were called upon to save the movement in Birmingham, they did not hesitate. Where on the other side, a lot of adults hesitate. As I said, the black pulpit, I'm not saying the congregation, the black pulpits in Birmingham were divided. I would argue that the majority of preachers in Birmingham did not support Martin Luther King. But the children did. They defied the adults and their parents and went to the front of the struggle to save the struggle, literally announcing that when our people called for us, we were there for them. Children, I'm talking about children. People don't understand that children can decide these matters, and they did. They exhibited levels of sacrifice and courage not seen before. They went to the front of struggle with dignity and discipline. Let us look at all of the qualities they exhibited. Dignity and discipline. The older people who were hesitating, not just because they had jobs and other obligations, they hesitated because they weren't certain of the outcome. The children made them proud. As I said, they were literally saying, if our people need us, we are here. If these are children and youth, 3 to 16, 3 to 18 years old, let us say, if our people need us, we're here. But there was a debate about whether the children should be deployed. And on the side of deploying the children were Shuttlesworth and King, because they had considered, first of all, we don't have all the churches on our side to begin with. If the pastor stand up on Sunday and say, look, not only is King an outsider, not only is King and the SCLC disruptive, and we think we can negotiate our way to freedom in Birmingham. We talked about a little bit of this last time. But King is doing this for himself. He wants fame. He wants attention. So if they had deployed the children, it would have added to the arguments against him coming into Birmingham. So Shuttlesworth spoke. And in a nutshell, Shuttlesworth said, if they're old enough to decide to be baptized, they're old enough to make a decision about joining the freedom movement. That was Shuttlesworth. That's the way he rolled. And Martin Luther King himself said that going to jail is not the worst thing, because Gaston, A.J. Gaston, who was not with King, who owned the motels and so on, he was saying that, well, you're going to stain these children for the rest of their lives by undermining their education, by holding them back from graduation and other things. King made the argument, which I think is really the decisive argument as we approach you today. King made the argument that his experience of going to jail had elevated his moral education and consciousness, and that going to jail, while perhaps holding them back, from graduation or moving on to the next grade, would so elevate their moral consciousness to have made the loss of school days insignificant. So there were two arguments, and two very important arguments made. The one by Shuttlesworth, that if they're old enough to decide to be baptized, they're old enough to decide to go to jail. And King's argument that going to jail for the cause of freedom elevates your moral consciousness. King was absolutely right. I'll end here. The Birmingham movement ends on September 16, 1963, with the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 little girls in Sunday school, or preparing for Sunday school, were killed. The Children's Crusade ended with the assassination of 4 young girls. The March on Washington itself took place on the 8th anniversary of the assassination of Emmett Till. What I am saying, although not fully acknowledged or understood, the capacity for revolutionary and moral consciousness of children and youth is extraordinary. It is we who underestimate them. It is we who have the idea that we must guide the children, when in fact the children have the capacity, and I think really the moral capacity, because of this sense of justice and uncompromising sense of the moral imperative, they do have the capacity to lead us. So going forward, if there is to be a movement that looks something like what happened in Birmingham, I think part of that must be based upon our understanding of children and our proper understanding of ourselves. That often we have more to learn from children than we want to give them credit for. It's not a one-way street. I'll stop there.
Okay. It's always so hard and difficult to follow Dr. Montero or Tony. For those who have come the previous weeks and also will be coming future weeks, I think individuals are familiar with the forum pack, the structure. So for the next, I believe, hour and a half, we'll move into the discussion. Just a couple of things. I think others have heard this before. Please project your voice and raise your hand when you want to add to the conversation, speak. I think even before then, too, a couple of things is from the learnings of the previous 2 weeks, there's a lot on people's minds in terms of what we are listening to in this room and also as we're reflecting on the city. But because this is a large group and because there's a lot that we want to discuss, we ask that people focus on the topics that were shown today. Specifically to Dr. Montero's point on the purpose of knowing this history of Birmingham, Martin Luther King Jr. as a revolutionary, and of course today's topic, children and youth, their revolutionary consciousness. With that, another point is that this is a very special place as we look around the room. I think for many individuals, there's not many places where people can be in person and in community with one another. And I think people are also still getting used to that in this room. So please do not talk over one another. We'll progress as organized as the Black Freedom Movement have had. But, and then we'll also solicit some comments from the online viewers as well. So, Jeremiah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you shared. As you were talking, two thoughts came to mind. One question.
Can you speak up?
One question came to mind and a thought came to mind. I just jotted them down. When I think about the children of Birmingham, I so am reminded of the capacity of children to lead and what we can learn from them. But I'm also mindful of the fact that the children came forward and were trained and how to fight. And so a question came up for me is knowing that it's within children to recognize oppression and to recognize when harm is being done and to seek for a way to address that. So assuming that children are aware of the oppression and injustice they experience today, how are our children fighting for their freedom today?
Jeremiah.
I wanted to think about your question before I say something, but I also had a few comments, and as I'm talking, I might think about your question too. But I want to say that for people who were here at the beginning, we played a song that you also heard in the film, which was I'm on my way to Freedom Land. And one of the reasons why we wanted to play that song is because if you listen to the lyrics of the song, it is indicative, it's representative of the consciousness of the young people who participated in the Birmingham Children's Crusade, where they say, if my mother won't go, I'll go anyhow. And one of the reasons why, again, like I'm drawn to that song, along with the Change Is Gonna Come rendition by Otis Redding, is that this is something that James Bevel points out in an interview, which is that the children in Birmingham, part of what made them ready for the struggle was that he says that they did not have the same kinds of fears that their parents and that the adults did. And that the older people had become so conditioned, this is his words, they had been conditioned to fearing Jim Crow retribution, fearing the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, the police who would show up to the mass meetings, that there was this decline in participation amongst adults, whether it's in the jails or in the mass meetings, and that it was the children who both recognized what Doc said, of had a clear understanding of their own oppression, of Jim Crow, why it was wrong, but that they had a kind of courage that they were ready for a kind of courage that maybe their parents were not. And so it took the children to make it possible. And the other thing that he says is that I just wanted to connect the dots of Bethel makes this point that to go to those, because it wasn't just in the city of Birmingham proper, it was kids were feeding in from towns all over the area. And so you had thousands of children, many of them literally walking like 18, 20 miles to get to the city for the D-Day demonstration. And one of the things that Bethel says is that if you think about Black people in America, if a child in Birmingham goes to jail, they're going to have relatives in Chicago, in Philadelphia, and Cleveland who are going to hear about this. And this is part of what makes it possible for there to be a national movement. And after the Birmingham Crusade, the March on Washington happens, but it's also all of these cities erupt into these movements. And it's really the children of Birmingham who make that possible. But I just want to say that I think one of the things that I've been observing over the past 2 weeks is I think as adults, we're often very quick whenever it comes to this question of children to very automatically turn it into a question of pedagogy, of how do we take this and apply it into a learning lesson for our young people. And I think that in some ways is a disservice to them, but it's also a disservice to ourselves, because I think in some ways that's the easy option. And it prevents us from actually confronting the kinds of questions that the doc brought up in the beginning. And I say this as maybe I qualify in the youth category, being under 30, but that I think oftentimes when people talk about young people, and whether explicitly or implicitly, they're counting young people out and essentially lowering the sky of expectation for what even we believe young people are capable of. I often think that, from my experience, is more reflective of the fact that older people dismiss children and youth because they believe so little in themselves. And that's something that I've observed about being here in the city, and I guess the ways that we talk about young people. But I just wanted to bring that up. And I think that today's discussion and the materials that we read and watched through are a really tremendous exploration of, well, do the children show us something about what they're capable of that tells us something about ourselves too, as opposed to assuming that, like others have said, we have everything to teach them. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Can I just say something? Trina, I think that's a very important question. I agree. But I'd like to separate the question into two. What I was trying to establish is the capacity of children and youth. Not only just youth, children and youth. So that's what I was, and I was trying to make the argument that often the capacity for moral decision making and moral action is often, and I think Birmingham showed this, higher for children than it is for adults. That could be wrong, but the other thing, and I agree with you on this, the training for struggle. And this is something that not only children but adults had to go through, with the workshops and so on. But I'd like to your question, I'd like to just separate it into two.
So I think we have a couple of hands, but let's let Trina respond.
The spirit behind the question was, your talk made me think about, what does that look like today? Are we missing how they are fighting or trying to fight? So that question
Yes.
Okay, one second. We have a couple of hands, but please project your voice, because I think some people on this side can't hear. So raise your hand first, and I think this lady here.
Yeah. My name is Angie Hinton. I am the executive director of an organization, a nonpartisan organization that works with young people year round to make sure they're civically engaged. They are voting, they understand how to be accountable, they're doing accountability work. So we do year-round engagement with young people. And I can tell you, they are very engaged and want to be activated, right? So we do work year-round, what's on the ballot, how it connects to the issues that they care about, right? We ensure they have nonpartisan resources so they know how to vote. We do registration. We do GeoTV events. These kids are phone banking. They're creating very innovative types of events to make sure that they are then taking what they're learning and furthering it. And so we have seen great success in Philadelphia. We're also in Allegheny County and out a little bit in the suburbs of Philadelphia. We work directly with the school district. We work with the board of commissioners directly, and we've seen the turnout for 18-year-olds outpacing the general turnout in elections, right? So, but also them understanding and starting to learn how to go and testify to school boards, right? How to testify to council about programming, things like that. So I think when we are engaging them, they're still very much like have this moral consciousness and are really wanting to make an impact and a difference. I see they look at kind of everything that's happening. From what I can tell, they care very much about all the same issues we care about, right? And they're looking to really try to hold leaders accountable to addressing them. So they are. We just released our intern application. I think that ties into this. We typically engage like 10 in election cycle, which is college kids that are then doing the work to come in and mentor high school. We're primarily in high schools doing voter registration. We recently released our thing and we got 137 applications, many of them from HBCUs in the South, right? So young people really are still wanting to make change, but they are looking for more opportunities to be engaged, be trained on how to do this work. And then what we've seen is young people that we started with in high school continue to come back and then they mentor the younger ones. So we have kids now, our first year we worked in 2020 are in college and now they're coming back and expanding on our program.
Emily, Sandeep, and Loretta?
Yeah.
Okay, and then,
Do you want to second?
oh, yeah, we'll take 3 at a time. There's a lot of people who.
Well, the reason why I like Gina's question is because what I get from what Doc said is that I think sometimes we don't see the right signs. Like I think sometimes adults are really patronizing towards children and youth. And it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a place of like being under the guise of trying to protect young people. But it also basically ends up being pretty patronizing, thinking that you're protecting children when actually children have more of a sense of I don't want to be conformed into a system of injustice that I know deep down in my soul is not right. And so I like the way I interpret also Trina's question and the way Doc is putting this criteria on of like, what is a child? What is a child's capacity? It's this thing of like, are we looking, it's basically the question of, is it possible that we are missing the signs of what children are already capable of because we're seeing it the wrong way? And like, I'll just give an example, which is like, because I want to actually underline that children, what they have to teach the most is a sense of what you said, which is a moral criteria that I think becomes tarnished over time because of just how bogged down we are by the system and by even laws that tell us right something is right or wrong, legal or illegal, versus what's God's law, truth law, moral law. And a story I want to tell is like Doc and I were once on the bus. Like we were on the bus going to the free library, and it happened to be when kids were coming out of school, and so it must have been like 8-year-old kids, and they were all sitting. It was the 30 bus, 33, 30 down. I forget. It was like one of those super long buses with the scrunchie in the middle, where kids go to the back and they hide from the bus driver, and they're doing stuff in the back that they should be doing. And there's a small group of probably who were kids that were more probably what I consider bullies. Like they were talking smack to the bus driver. The bus driver in the front was like talking smack back to the kids in the back. And the kids, when they were leaving the bus at Bell Park, like made a point to yell at the bus driver. They're only like 7, 8 years old. They said like, you can go F yourself. And young, very young. But then what was interesting was that the bus driver also talked back and said, you stay right there at the corner of Love Park because I'm gonna drop all these people off and come back with your like time. And I was like, honestly, I respect that. I respect that. But the point I want to make is when those kids left, there were so many other kids in the back of the bus who were quiet. And there's Doc and I were sitting back there. The other kids, immediately when those little kids went off, like the ones who were causing trouble, all the kids, they were so aghast. They looked at each other. And they were like, could you believe what that just happened? They were so rude. And the other story was once when Doc and I, it was a different time on the bus. Doc gave up his seat for like this older woman. And this little kid looked at Doc and said, that was so nice of you. And what I'm trying to say is like, I feel like that little kid was affirming Doc, so much older, being like, that was such a good thing you did. And the point I'm trying to make is that I actually think sometimes we don't perceive it right. We don't see it. But actually, I think with children in Philadelphia, all this narrative of children are criminals already at this age, doing all this stuff. Yes, there is violence. Yes, there's gun violence for a reason. But for a reason which we can talk about. But, and I'm not excusing it. But I think actually on the whole, what I see from children is a moral resistance. And you have to see it as resistance. It is a moral resistance against what? You identify both a moral resistance and then against what? And the what is it's a moral resistance against a ruling elite decades after King's assassination, a deliberate effort from people in power to put poison in the culture, put poison in narratives, convincing us that we are not moral people, that we are not paragons of civilization. And I wanted to pick up on something Richard said you said in the first week where you were like, why the biggest crime against the people in a city like Philly, which has such a history of art and culture that is revolutionary, is that there somehow has been a revolutionary culture where love and revolution were intertwined like this. Why is it that today, when we think revolution, we think destruction? What happened to love and revolution? Love is the highest state of human consciousness, revolutionary consciousness. And in a lot of ways, I actually see in youth and children, I see that. It's like children are looking for positive alternatives, which I would call revolutionary alternatives. They're not interested in just reform or small gains. They're interested in revolution, which comes from a place of love. And that's what I mean, that's just, I just wanted to make that point because resistance sometimes doesn't look like, oh, they're already in the streets doing X, Y, Z. The first step is, man, how is it that the children already are waging a moral resistance that sometimes I don't think adults wage enough? I don't think adults are morally resisting enough. So I just want to put that on the table.
So I know there's a couple of individuals that want to say something, but really quickly, I think part of the challenge of our conversations is that oftentimes we want to find answers through these 6 weeks. And I actually think this third week is a week or a day in which there are actually more questions. And the reason why I say that is because for the free school, during the year of James Baldwin, this was in 2024, we actually were at 2 high schools and reading James Baldwin together. And the words of Baldwin very much in line with Martin Luther King Jr. And actually what we found from that experience is that, yes, we were bringing Baldwin's words and of course the ideas that we talk about here, but actually we learned more from the children in the sense that there were things that they were bringing up that we had no answers to, which is, for example, one young man said, I don't take the train or the SEPTA, I take the bus. And what do you tell them in terms of there is no easy solution to that the city is unsafe. But I think, so that was one example. And I think the other is that, I believe this was 2 weeks ago. Oh no, I forget, the Arizona kids. When was this? A month ago. Okay, a month ago, there were these young kids that came, and Tony was giving his remarks, and something that the kids, you know, at the beginning weren't very listening. You know, as young kids, sometimes they get bored if they don't think it's important. And so Tony said something, which is that it's not just Trump that is corrupt. This whole system is corrupt. And we saw these kids, and they lit up, and they agreed with that. And so if that is, and I think this is to what Emily is saying, which is, what are the signs? What are they saying that we're not listening to because we don't have easy answers to tell them? Mm-hmm. And if anything, we are struggling through that. Mm-hmm. And we are trying to open our eyes to that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is the challenge, which is I guess we're all asking in this conversation maybe to slow things down, actually, in the sense of really not only sharing what we've seen, but also listening to what have we heard from children. I mean, maybe half of this room is youth, but I don't know if there's any children in here. But everyone knows of a child, a daughter, a son, a granddaughter, whatever it is. And what is it that we're not picking up because we don't have answers to? And I think that is where it lies. Sorry for taking up the time. There are a couple of hands in the, but I think Sandeep was first, and then Loretta, and then this lady here.
Good morning, everybody.
Yeah.
My name is Sandeep Agarwal. I'm an educator. I'm seriously committed to our cause. I mentioned maybe 2 weeks ago, because I couldn't make it to last week's, the Black struggle, the Black cause, it's a human struggle, a human cause. Because we are all human beings. We all come from a greater spiritual energy, one result. That being said, I do have a solution to what my sister mentioned. I had a discussion on where it came from, and we all will realize. And I also have a solution, and I'll use my life as an educator and engineer as an example of some of the things I did. And I think that's part of share part of that ultimate solution that will bring more change, that will allow Black students and Black human beings in general, to see that we are all one. We all know the cause. Unhealthy capitalism. Right? We all know how this country formed. It wasn't because of us. It was because of another race. And they perpetuated their desire to control and basically diminish the value of all human beings. All right, so we know it. All right, it's understood by Asian Indians, all of Africa, minus, what was that, Ethiopia and Liberia. Those were the only two countries in Africa. Africa is a continent, as we all know, that weren't colonized. But all of Africa, all of Asia, all of the colored world knows this. Now, so we know where it came from. Now let's talk about a solution. So when I was in India, I went to India every 2 to 3 years because my mother, after we got here in '68, my father got a job at Penn as a biochemist. We went every 3 years back to India so I could learn my culture, learn how to read and write and study. My grandfather, my mother's father, R.K. Agarwal, he was the dean of the University of Rajasthan. He set the tone of how education should be taught in the state of Rajasthan. So obviously, all of that was filtered into his grandchildren, us. And so I used that as a basis as I was being educated in America and India to understand the human struggle, not just the Black struggle, but the human struggle. And what I realized, I don't know about Black history in India than in America, in the American Philadelphia public school system, which was atrocious. How can I not learn about Black history growing up in the Black Philadelphia? And I learned more about that in India at a private school. Can you believe that? It's true. It's true. Asians, Africans, and all other people from other societies are learning about America in a more comprehensive manner than America itself. Now that's all by design. I needed to say that because I was understanding Birmingham in a private school in India where it's nothing but Indian teachers. How is that possible when they didn't even grow up in Black America? So the history is being disseminated. It is being talked about. I know, I'm living proof. Now, how did I go out and fix this? The sister said, how are the Black youth being affected? Well, I went to Henry C. School in West Philadelphia during my youth. My mother made sure I got into engineering and science. Engineering and science, Philadelphia opened up. She went to, well, the mayor was at that time. She was supposed to be, I'm not sure. But she said, look, my kid is going to be an engineer because that's what he wants. And regardless of how far we were away from the high school, she made sure I got it. And that's where my education progressed even more, apart from learning all the stuff I was learning anyway. I took it upon myself to just help. But I needed to become educated first. How can I help anybody if I don't know nothing? So I pursued education in all fields. Do the best I can, get as many A's as I can, no matter how much I was discriminated against whites, by blacks as well, and by my own Indians because I had black friends. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy how one race is pitted against another, all because of this unhealthy capitalism. But that's what was being done to me. So I said, all right, my mother sat me down and said, look, you're going to read the Bhagavad Gita, the New Holy Bible. You're going to read the Christian Bible, the New Testament, or what have you. And you're going to understand the meaning behind what God wants. So I did. And the parallels that I got was we're all human beings. We all bleed, feel, cry, laugh, have fun in the exact same ways. All of this outside stuff, the food we eat, the culture, how we look, how we shave, how we dress, that's all the icing on the cake. The cake is our inner selves, our spirits. So that's what I got out of all of the spiritual reading. And once I got that, I believe I kind of got the solution to life itself in this country, which is to just give. Work hard, be honest, and give help. So what I did was I joined the Society of Black Engineers. It's an organization, it's a professional student organization that's been around since 1970. We started in Purdue University. I liked what they were selling. I liked how they were selling. They were producing STEM professionals that were black STEM professionals, and they were doing it qualitatively. We weren't just cheating through exams. We weren't like the norm is, hey, we got to use what we got to get what we want.
Sandeep, I'm just going to move the conversation forward just a little bit. No problem.
So the solution is get help.
And just one thing in terms of what you've said, and we don't promote this in the free school, but there's actually many engineers in the free school or PhDs in the free school. And I only say that not to say that that's a positive. What has been shown actually is that the education of the sciences has not given the people in the free school a moral education. And that's what we're really focused on today. But just because I know there's a lot of people that want to add to the conversation, discuss, let's move, we can talk after this. Yes, go ahead.
So what I did was, as I was helping create libraries, as I was helping create solutions to learn this engineering, science, and math, we were also talking about the social history of America. So I would bring in famous black inventors and Asian inventors, Dr. West, black man invented the microphone, Michael Birch, many famous black and Indian inventors and scientists. And then we would talk about this very form, the meaning behind why we should, which is to follow this.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Loretta?
So.
Please.
I wanted to speak from a more global perspective of this because, as I shared with you, I'm a fellow with the Gandhi Mandela Institute. And so we were talking about this in Spain this summer. And so there's a couple of things. You had discerned that there was a limit to a pedagogical construct. There is in this writing, because Dr. King stated here, the direct action crusade, that is a pedagogical construct. Within that construct, looking at is his heavy criticism of using youth. But what is critical about the youth being used and important is its impact on all of them during that time.
Right.
And the reason why I speak to that is because, surprisingly enough, huge movements were happening in Jersey at this very same time. Huge. I was very activated at during that time. And I think that's really critical because the impact of seeing yourself as a youth move allowed you to move. It gave you courage. It encouraged you to move and to pose family members. My family was going to send me to Pittsburgh because I was a youth. You know, that's all right. I started there too. So that happens. But it also what is critical that helped the movement go forward was 1963, that bombing. When we saw ourselves being bombed, I know that implemented something in me, said, I have to fight.
That was an act of resistance. Now, the reason why that's important, because as we look at it from a global perspective, we have to look at community alliances and where the impact implemented through the CRM during that time. And wait, how it affected South Africa and the youth movement there. So that impact was so global that that's an aspect to draw youth into a conversation, because these kids now are global.
Thank you. With this lady, and then
Gerard and Richard.
Richard, Gerard, and Samira.
Hello, my name is Jane. I was 19, living in Pittsburgh in 1963. My question is
Hey,
this.
excuse me, could you keep your voices down? She's speaking.
My question is this, and it relates to what you brought up, and particularly to what you brought up and the woman who isn't sitting here anymore, the young woman. My question is this. How are children and youth today developing their basic moral understanding? Because what they are seeing on television, in the movies, online, is violence that is not conferred on their bodies or the bodies of people they love. They are seeing virtual violence. Now, of course, many people are seeing physical violence, but our morality, I think, has been corrupted by money, corrupted by capitalist influence, removed from tenderness, removed from the flesh understanding of what it is to be flesh with others who are flesh. Thank you.
Religious Gerard and then Richard. There's also. And then.
I just want to kind of keep it short, and I feel like everybody also, everybody else brought up a really good point, is I feel like to a certain degree, we still think like we are in a neutral society, but we're like Black life has been in a state of war. People still are getting pathologized. They're still also being seen as a YN. People are being put in states of death. People have economic and cultural forms of genocide that are being acted on them. And I feel like it's adults and people, the kids also can see that. They're not dumb. It's like colonialism. They would see you as, oh, we need to give you this white fraternal light, or we need to bring you civilization. To a certain degree, we're still in an economic society war. The schools are actively getting shut down. This is just another form of segregation. And the kids can see that. They're not just going through like blind. It's like this a priori of just phantasmagoria of images. Like, there's an active moral Black light. If you go to Correct or any of these places, they segregate and disenfranchise communities. And the kids are not on corners for no reason. It's an act of you shutting down rec centers and state violence on Black life. And people have to go through that. And so why people might get labeled as a YN, you might have to deal with cultures where people perceive vice that is structurally created by a white supremacist system that puts drugs in communities to destroy them after there were revolutionary images with the Panthers as cities being sites to set things off. So I just want to bring this up that the kids are not dumb in the sense of it's almost a colonial-esque, you're not good enough, or we have to be this benefactor. And now they have to deal with the nonprofit industrial complex of white liberals who don't have their best intentions of heart. And the kids who might be able to label as a YN can see that. They might not have the form of process or no state of revolution, but they can eventually want to go through that. Like, they have to go through their lives with messed up, food deserts. They have to go through their lives with police and state violence until they get food. Like, that's not nothing to play with. It's still a segregated and war economy. I feel like it's adults who are not seeing, don't put your inhibitions on the kids who are going through this, and they're black. They have to live with the history of the modern form of governance being slavery, because a lot of things hierarchically exchanged. If they're put this thing of necropolitics and death, they have to live through. So when people talk about gang violence and killing each other, that's not because people might not have any resources to climb out to find a better day.
So we have Richard and Samir. Did either of you want to respond directly to Gerard? Okay, then go ahead, Richard.
No, I'm just.
And then we'll have you, James, afterwards.
Because I appreciate this again, because I'm always y'all are helping me process. So as a Black Philadelphia, who recognize that Philadelphia is a column. I think I've said that before. That we operate as a column, and what I get out of this is the notion that respectability politics is not revolutionary politics. It's the two different things, and I think we have to be clear, because in Philadelphia, we're looking at a social order of respectability politics operating, not revolutionary politics. And so that's why what I take out of this and making and being able to see King, even in Birmingham, as a revolutionary leader, that's what young people at that moment seen him as. They see him as a revolutionary leader. They felt him as a revolutionary leader, and they were already, and I think it's important to recognize that young people have leaders. They have leaders already. I mean, they was taking me through the line, trying to take me through the line to be a part of the game. You got a structure. So, and I think in 63, they still have a cultural structure. Now, and so I think that that's important, that King, as a symbolic, not an operational revolutionary leader, was able to galvanize young people in that moment. And that's something you don't. We do not have a symbolic revolutionary leader. We do not have a revolutionary culture, but we do have a lot of adults who are operating in this respectability politic mechanism culture. And we call them Black elected officials. We call them institutional leaders. We call them a lot of things. We call them parents who want their children to be better than themselves. That's not revolutionary. That's accommodating. I like the part about the history. And I'm kind of always focusing on colonial history and Black Philadelphia. When we talk about social consciousness, and even in this institution that we're in, because it made me think about the fugitive slave clause and the fugitive slave law, and how Black leadership that were revolutionary. The fugitive slave clause, because those men and women were trying to change the structure that allowed the Constitution to say it was okay to capture your child and sell them into slavery. They petitioned. They organized. They broke the law to do that. Is that part of Black Philadelphia historical social consciousness that we perpetuate? And I like that idea of even the pedagogy. We don't even have that in the pedagogy. We don't have it in the cultural pedagogy in Black Philadelphia, and we don't have it in the institutional pedagogy. That we have always been early on a part of a revolutionary struggle. They said it in the convention.
Samir, James, and Jeremiah.
My name is Samir from the Saturday Free School. I wanted to agree with Gerard really quickly about the war economy, and to say that we've been in a war economy since World War II. And ever since World War II, before propaganda would be restricted to wartime, but since World War II, we've been in a constant state of propaganda that's called itself the public relations industry. But returning to the topic at hand, children in the Birmingham movement, the reason why children led the Birmingham movement was because when you are young and you are more innocent, you're less likely to be infected by the pessimism of adults. I think, Dr. Montero, you've said in the past that children need a sky. They need to see a future in a world that they can live in, that they belong in, that fashions their identity. Sometimes we discuss civilization. It reminded me, I don't want to talk about, pedagogy or, how do we reach children, but, what are we reaching them with? The reason why children were attracted to nonviolence is because they couldn't participate in a violent struggle. And by having a nonviolent struggle, you allowed children to participate in their own struggle for liberation. And just lastly, it reminded me of Howard Thurman and the book Jesus and the Disinherited. Nonviolence, as Martin Luther King said, is the unadulterated force of love. Love is a creative force. Love generates. Love generates ideas. We have new options. When we fight in the streets, violence begets violence. We all understand that it is a cycle. But what Martin Luther King was doing is, he wasn't going out and talking to children. That's not what made the difference. What he was doing was, disseminating a new way of doing things, a new consciousness, so that we can fashion children into the human beings that will inhabit the world after we're gone. Sometimes in preschool, we call it a new human being. There's that guy, Yuval Harris or Noah or something. He has that book, Homo Sapiens, which I know. So he has that book, Homo Sapien. But we want to talk about the modern man. That's what King was doing. Homo sapien, sapien, sapien. I guess where this comes.
James?
Would you stand up?
A lot of people are not familiar with family planning. I wonder if you got any information about that kind of thing.
Well, I'm just saying, because I don't want to interrupt the general discussion, but yes, Fannie Lou Hamer was a significant figure, especially in the Mississippi voter registration and voting campaign. And Fannie Lou Hamer was a part of forming the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which came to the 1964 Democratic Party convention in Atlantic City and contested the seating of the Mississippi delegation, which was based upon excluding Black people from the vote.
And I just want to say, it's because of her, the parent party got it started.
Okay. One second. Jeremiah, unless, and then Lena, I think wants to. So Jeremiah, Lena, Cesar, and then
Oh, gosh.
James. We'll start from there first. Or not. Okay. Jeremiah.
I just wanted to make a quick point, which is that I think even going back to this question, like the kind of starting question that Trina raised of what are young people in Philadelphia, what are they actually fighting for, and what are they responding to? And I don't know, I forget your name, the lady who you spoke earlier.
What are they fighting for?
Well, just I was thinking about your comment too in response to that question, and
Jeremiah, the question was,
yes.
how are our children fighting for their freedom?
Yes, right. And I was thinking about the question, and I wanted to bring up a few points, which were, I think I'm actually interested in the young people who are not engaged in the political system. And I bring that up because in the last primary election, which was one of the most nationally televised, most hotly looked at elections in recent memory in Philadelphia, actually, if you look at the results, 18 to 34-year-olds were the lowest voter turnout compared to the larger age demographics, and significantly lower than older people. And I bring that up not as a way to kind of dismiss what you're saying, but that I think I kind of feel like we have to look at things from a broader picture of why are young people in Philadelphia, why are they so disinterested in the conventional means of politics that are presented to them and the way of being engaged in the city? And I wanted to just share a quick anecdote, which goes back to something that Alice said, which is a few years ago when we did the Year of James Baldwin reading group, I was part of a reading group at West Philadelphia High School with junior level students. And the thing that has always stuck with me from that experience was we were talking with, these are 15, 16-year-olds in West Philly High School. And we were talking with a young woman in that classroom. And the thing that really struck me was we were talking with these young women about what do they see about their future. And most of the young women in that classroom said they want to get out of Philadelphia. They want to get out of the city because they don't want to raise their children around all of this violence. And the other thing that really struck me was they were already thinking about, oh, like, I'm going to have to start paying rent soon. I'm going to start living on my own soon at 16. And when I was 16, I was not thinking about any of those questions. And I want to say that because I think it's not the most overt way of even addressing what you were saying, but I think there's a response, there's a deeper response that young people in our city are having, which is, this is a city that does not respect them. It's a city that is not interested in them. It's a city that doesn't want to be for them. And if there's any demographic in the city that the city should be for, it should be these young people in West Philly High School and South Philly High School, especially those kids whose many of their grandparents, their parents are the ones who built Philadelphia in the first place. Why is it that they feel like the city does not want them here and does not want them to be here? And I think just another point is, sorry, I get worked up about it because I think another point that was brought up is, Bethel in this interview, he says, why did we bring these young people into the movement? And it's because at that same time, you were asking 17-year-olds to go kill and die in Vietnam. And those same young people are capable of making a different kind of choice. And they know what they're being presented with. And I just feel very strongly that whether or not you're a college student, a high school student, whether or not you go to a good university or you don't, I think that at a basic level, and this also gets to the point about social media, I just feel like young people in America as a whole have been living through, for the past especially 3 years, nonstop, being shown images of young people like them being killed by Israel and by the United States government. And I don't think that that's something that you can go back from. And it may result in things like, the DSA, but I think that the actual consequences of that, young people being shown that constantly, children younger than them, children who could be their siblings, being shown constantly, this is what your government is doing. Whether or not they're vocalizing it, I think that experience of the past 3 years is going to, in many ways, make or break the direction that our young people will go in. But I just wanted to bring up those points that I think we have to look beyond not just to kill the children or young people who are engaged in the conventional modes of politics, but all of these young people who feel like that politics has failed them. The adults have failed them. The system has failed them.
Alina, and then were there some people, Blaze, Dwight, and they'll go next round.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is this good?
Yes.
Okay. Is your name Fred? What's your name? Oh, Richard. I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, Richard. Sorry. Okay, so I really wanted to reaffirm what Richard said about Philadelphia being a colony. I think that's one of the most noteworthy things that's been said today, especially because I've just been having to contend with it as an educator myself. And so there's who I am as an educator in the classroom, and then there's like my personal beliefs and my personal understandings of reality. And I do believe in the dissemination of information at an age-appropriate level, right? Because in reality, we do have to eventually contend with the fact that not only a continent, but a hemisphere has been totally taken and transformed in ways that have brought about total morbidities and fatalities across the board for so many people that in my background, in my training as an environmentalist, we're taught to actually name the facts. We're living through the 6th mass extinction event, and the human species has had an impact on the planet that is something that we're giving language to. So when we talk about Black life and the needs of Black life, we can totally couch this into a much larger picture of destruction. And I think that it's a moral quandary for us all because of where we physically are. We're here commemorating the 250th anniversary of America's founding, and we're trying to teach youth about this location and why it matters, right? And Dr. Montero keeps saying, well, Philadelphia can become the site of the next revolution. And he continues to reaffirm this. And I just wanted to, to point out a few, just to bring that to our attention, to sit with, because first of all, I'm from LA, and I'm a product of Juneteenth, meaning that the message reached my peoples, and we were pushed west, and we were met with dogs on the road. So my grandmother arrived in Los Angeles, into Watts, with twin children and another child, having to build a life around herself, arriving from the bayou, right? And what happened? The city burned around her block. They were at the epicenter of the riots that occurred in Watts. And so when we talk about the civil rights movement of this time, it was experienced differently in different locations. And I think that when we think about, well, what can Philadelphia bring to the nation, and what is this history that we're stewarding? Why does it matter? I am the first of my generation, along with my siblings, to attend college. When I went, I'm the same age, by the way, as Trayvon Martin. If Trayvon Martin were alive, he would be my age. I'm 31 years old. I went into college, and the Black Lives Matter movement was born on our backs. And what we saw as we were incarcerated for participating in this movement, what we saw is that many of our elders obtained titles that they had not ever yet been able to obtain. But the movement did not necessarily have demands. And so when we talk about, on the first page, how this movement in Birmingham came about mobilizing the youth, after school meetings at churches, this is not actually something, if you want to look back to what occurred recently with the Black Lives Matter movement, never did I ever attend an after school meeting at a church. The churches did not assume liability for the health and vitality of the youth mobilized. We were, sent against police forces that were trained in Israel in crowd control tactics, who were dispersing illegal chemicals onto human populations, which caused miscarriage and all sorts of lifelong effects. So we were met with a police force that had become militarized, and our generation helped to narratize that. And I would just bring that forward for how we're discussing this today, because we're not even thinking of me, right? I'm 31, I'm the educator, and now we're talking about Philadelphia's youth now. It's 2026, we're in the 250th, and thinking about this location and why it matters. We're talking about the next generation, we're beyond Black Lives Matter, just saying. So, and what we just survived, which hasn't even been written yet, was that we didn't get doctorates. Most of us did not survive that movement. We crashed out getting our elders into the rank that they deserved so that they could have a living salary in a location where none of my people remain where they were planted, right? We don't have the right to exist and to live and to own property in the state of California. We're on the roads in droves with these fires, and it's an absolutely chaotic environment, right? So you do have to eventually piece it together, because now we're part of a new generation facing Trump post-pandemic. And you're thinking, okay, well, this is the city that educated Trump, by the way. And where I was an educator last year, you could hop on a trolley and in 5 minutes arrive at the school that educated Trump, but nobody gets off on that stop. And none of these youth believe that they have a right to step foot on that campus. So I'm just leaving this all out here for you all to think about, because I don't think that we've actually attended to my generation and what we lost. I feel isolated and deprived of love. I didn't come here to intellectualize about this movement. I paid with my suffering and my body and my time. I've aged tremendously. I have so many physical ailments. I am like, I don't think that we've attended to it at all. We haven't really written about the Black Lives Matter movement and what people who actually, 20, the early what do you say, the 2010s, like we didn't write about that, and we still have yet to write about the 2020s. And so the past 20 years must be documented as you then begin to say, okay, we're focusing on the youth now, which is a totally distinct generation. And so as you're analyzing, well, why are they not engaged? They've seen what people have to lose. They've seen they're observing. They are often the children of people my age. They saw, so anyway, I'm just putting that out there and concluding my thoughts, but if the children appear to be disengaged now, these are children who are sometimes born in the pandemic or grew up in elementary school in the pandemic, and they saw their parents losing resources, vitality, and their physical health status under those constraints. So if they appear to be disengaged, it's because a whole new movement would need to be born through them to address an entirely different perspective. So.
Thank you, Lena. There's a couple of individuals. Raise your hand if I've missed you. Blaze, Dwight, Michelle, the next three, and we'll move on. Yep.
My name is Blaze. I'm a teacher of children from 1.5 to 3 years old in my classroom, and then up to 6 years old.
You have to speak up, Blaze.
Okay, I'll try. And I wanted to agree that one of the great capacities of children is their fine moral sensitivity and their sense of right and wrong and justice, not only for themselves, but for those around them. And I also wanted to add that when we're thinking about the revolutionary consciousness and revolutionary potential of children and youth, one of their greatest qualities is their search for truth, for what is real, what is reality. And that if you lie to a child, they know. And a child doesn't want BS, they want to know the truth and what's real. And we have to take that into account in any education of the children. And I think when I'm reflecting on Katrina's question, which I really appreciate, even any signs of a resistance to an environment that hates the child, that even the child's pure, almost philosophical search for truth and what's real is a struggle of resistance.
We'll have Dwight, Michelle, and then John.
Hi. Trina's question was, how are they fighting for this? The topic today was about hospitals of and Tony explained to you how issues of
speak up. Come closer.
Issues of today. I'm saying that issues of yesterday are today are different. And those conditions affect how we see the world. The overt racism, the youth growing up, our fathers coming home from World War II, segregated army. We couldn't even go to Kutztown State. We couldn't go to Temple or none of these schools at night. So you take those conditions out, you could live in certain parts of Philadelphia. Today, going to Temple. Today, going to Mark. So you got an angrier Negro back then than you have now. We want to take up guns. These kids don't want to take up guns. They shoot. So that the other thing, is a hard truth. Listen to the music that these kids will listen to. I was listening to one of the Chantel. Music about love, loving the woman, not about the oh. So when you fill the mind, children, and their consciousness, their consciousness is corrupted, right? You can't grow in a civilization like that. There's no way. And the evidence of that, when you walk in the city, you heard the what? Like, what? You heard, I mean, I'm saying, so basically, the point is, the hard truth is that you have to have discussion like this. It's going to take revolutionary. Martin Luther King was a mock, but he had black babies. You mentioned Black Lives Matter. Look at the leaders of Black Lives Matter. What were they doing? Getting money, already buying houses. That's the image that they projected. Martin Luther King didn't die with it. So we live in and we talk about maturity. Martin Luther King's three. But we live in a very mature society. The immigrants come in, and you buy some money, sell them out. Revolution is gone. So you need people like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X, to care about the youth. And the youth, that's what I'm saying, the youth need that. Now, not in our society. I'll leave with that. I think your question was about why, what are the findings? Yeah, what is the question? What is the findings? My last point. No, that was the question. So what are the findings? What is the freedom that they find? Freedom that I can define today is called. What is the freedom? In Philadelphia, we read every morning about guns. That's what they need to be fighting. They need to be criticizing themselves. They need to take black agency, fight.
Okay. So we have a couple of individuals, Michelle, John, Cesar, James, Eddie, Neha, Nicole, and Jack. But does anyone want to respond directly to Dwight before we move on to Michelle? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Nicole, go ahead.
I just wanted to that you're like, I just wanted to say that's my because I feel like at the same time, it needs some more stuff. So people aren't trying to mobilize towards something that's so clearly wrong. The media, the music, that the youth need us as adults. And I said, what you lost in your generation out of a different generation, but they need us to have. But in Philadelphia, because I'm the mother of kids that I'm trying to protect from other kids whose parents and it's sad because it's not those kids' fault whatsoever, but the stakes are too high that we as adults are failing to set our kids. I'm not talking respect. When I think about my dad and son, we were socialized in a home where values meant how you treat people, how you raise, what you take into your mind and your life. And that's been completely decimated in the city of Philadelphia. It starts at
homes from the crack era, and all of these things that have been done, they knew that the home is the strongest thing. That's why they have been destroying it. But I think we have to start there because the youth are filling their home back with what they know how to do. It's not.
One moment. I believe, so Jack, you want to respond directly?
Yeah, I believe the question because my sort of question or inquiry really kind of grew out of response or stuff. I love youth. I love children. I love people. And youth and children are really like the most exciting folk that I've been around. So that's first and foremost. And also I believe that there's no decision about them without them. So in terms of how you are fighting for me, or in my estimation, is that they're continuing to fight through language, right? We may not necessarily understand the operationalized language that they use or agree with it, because every older generation always has some issues with the youth. Like, my grandfather said, "Oh, y'all crazy." I'm saying some of you are crazy, so on and so forth, whatever. So again, they're fighting language, right? The transformation of what it looks like. And they're also continuing to fight. And I think that this is a melanin-rich fight as far as I'm concerned, through the creation or sort of transformation of culture, right? This whole AI piece, we all know about the detriments of it. We all understand, and many people fear, especially if we're continuing to call ourselves humans or whatever we call ourselves, breathers. I don't think breathers, I think it's all inclusive because we all breathe. Anyway, long story short, I think that this whole AI piece, looking at it from a strengths-based point of view, as opposed to telling folks what they need to do with it and that sort of thing. A lot of the youth that I work with, because I continue to work with them, are using this tool in ways to really kind of create a voice for themselves, create a lane for themselves, to rebel against the status quo in many regards. And I think it's good. I think it's good. One of the terms that one of my mentees told me is low key. I low key think that AI can be one of the most transformative in terms of their generation sort of tools that they can use to really kind of create a voice for themselves. It's a large language model, understanding sort of the base of it. One of the issues that I shut up after this with sort of this idea of code switching historically, right, is that in order to do it effectively, you have to know the code from which to switch, right? I'll say it again. One of my issues is that you have to know the code from which to switch. So I think young people are learning a lot more about this tool that a lot of people in, my generation and beyond don't necessarily know about. And I think one of the issues there is really understanding how they code switch, how they utilize this tool. I'm fascinated by what the tool is doing. They got report AI, multimodal AI, agentic AI, so on and so forth. And I'm gonna shut up again. Again, I just think that it's a tool that they can use, and I think it's a way that they're fighting, right? Fighting the fight that many of us don't even see, we don't know about.
Okay, Michelle, John, and Cesar.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a member of the Saturday Free School. I wanted to say that I appreciate how the conversation was set up today with the historical clips, but I wanted to draw a few things from Tony's remarks because I did not expect the sensitivity with which this topic would be treated. Speak up a little bit. I didn't expect the sensitivity with which this topic would be treated, and I just wanted to pull a few things out because I just really appreciate how you set the discussion up. So some of what I was getting from the way you situated the piece about youth and children in 1963 is, it sounds like the way that Bethel and King were able to design a way for youth to participate, to resist, and to sacrifice was very much connected to the maturation and perhaps the complete maturation of the civil rights movement, or potentially setting a foundation that then explained its developments in 1967, the connection between war, poverty, and racism. I think just I think it sounded to me like the way the children were able to take such a central role in Birmingham in 1963 really marked a turning point and a maturity or a flowering for the movement that I'm trying to make sense of, because you have different generations with the same intent and the same commitment to freedom bonded back together in a way that I think my generation, or we as many generations, do not necessarily have. Like, where I know for myself, I feel disconnected from the younger generation in a way that does not feel totally natural. Like, even though I'm not very removed from them, I find it hard to find the opportunity to bond my experience or bond my inheritance to theirs. But I think that, again, the way you situated the child was valuable, because the thing that had also stuck out, either from your remarks or the clips, is how I think they said that when those 4 little girls were killed in the bombing in the church, that marked an end or a retreat from the Birmingham campaign. And I was thinking about that a lot in the last hour, because how I interpret that is, you know, the nonviolent method had been pressure tested through this campaign, and then it had worked. And if anything, it seems like that method became more complete. But what I interpret that killing of those 4 children signaling was perhaps a deeper threat, or like a more evil threat that than had initially been expected, with the resistance against the Black freedom movement on behalf of the white status quo. And so how I interpret the retreat is that, like, a higher method or a more revolutionary or more complete movement had to be developed again. But the reason I say that is because, like, in thinking about concretizing the child today, I mean, I think everyone in this room agrees that there is a crisis of youth and children. And I feel that everybody in this room is concerned about that. Like, I think we see similar images or experiences of, like, youth, and especially Black youth in this city, and how disenfranchised they are. But I also wanted to bring up the children who were killed at the start of the Iran war, who were bombed by the US. And then especially the imagery of the genocide in Gaza over a period of 2 or 3 years, and how in the end, I think it's the imagery of the children that has really imprinted on myself or all of us. So the connection I'm trying to make is, I think that this perception and this sensitive perception of the children tells us where the movement actually needs to go and what the criteria for a revolutionary movement is, but also that I think children articulate what the older generation must do, or what they actually need from the older generation. Like, I think, you know, just from seeing what the children in Gaza have endured, I know as an adult what my role is. And it is to end, like, the US as a war machine that bombs children in Asia. And I say it because, like, looking back to 1963, that was 60 years ago. But I feel that many patterns in the maturity of a revolutionary movement that we were seeing then have grown, like, to a much larger scale today. And if we see an entire city and country mourning the death of 4 Black children in 1963, like, we have that at a much more violent scale today, with hundreds of youth and children killed in the city every year. And that's just one city across many. Yeah, I wanna, there might be one more thing I wanted to say, but well, I think the last thing I wanted to say is I also feel that what's coming out in the discussion is I feel that children across the world may be more similar than ever today. And again, like, children articulate what our moral responsibility is, because the young generation can never escape the young generation can never escape the history, and they are coming into a moment in history in a way that is just inescapable in the end, because your consciousness is being formed by reality. Like, the best of it, and then all of the contradictions, like of that moment in history. So I think that's why we keep our eyes on the youth. But I think the last thing I wanted to say is, thinking about the children of Minab or the children of Gaza or like the Black children in our city, I don't see that much of a separation in what they've been forced to endure, but also their heroism, which can be observed in many ways, in many ordinary examples. And what I think is very important about the way Tony framed the conversation is it helps me to see the youth today as a potentially suppressed revolutionary generation, like a generation that already has both the will and the courage and the perception to change everything that's wrong with the society and world, but has been deliberately cleaved from actually being able to do so. Hence, like the Birmingham example is so useful because it actually showed full-fledged what that could look like if they were situated where they could be. That's all.
Okay, we have John, Cesar, James, Eddie, Neha. Remind me your name? Brother East and Gerard. But I think Eddie wants to respond directly to what Michelle is saying.
Yeah, I want to respond directly to what Michelle is saying. In her words, saying that the youth today are a sort of suppressed revolutionary possibility. I feel that young people have an incredible agency. And, I'll take the example, and by taking away Martin Luther King, I feel that we have diminished the capacity of our young people and the possibility of the future. I'll give an example of a young man, let's say, that came after Martin Luther King, Huey P. Newton. So I remember reading his autobiography, and I think what he articulates does express what a lot of young people experience right now. He said, during those long years in Oakland public schools, I did not have one teacher who taught me anything relevant to my own life or experience. Not one instructor ever awoke in me a desire to learn more or to question or to explore the worlds of literature, science, and history. All they did was try to rob me of the sense of my own uniqueness and worth, and in the process nearly killed my urge to inquire. I do feel that whether it's in a public school or in any other dimension of life, there is something that's diminishing young people, and I do think they have a moral compass and they have a sense of agency. So they're not going to just lie down and take it. They're not going to resign themselves to it. And what we have put on the table, I think, doesn't allow us to really have an appropriate response. And so whether it's being disrespectful or even violent, I do think young people will reject what is pushed onto them before them that diminishes them. And that doesn't mean that they don't have consciousness of what's right and wrong and a desire to take action. But it does mean that there's not a right avenue that because it's been taken away from us because we don't have a Martin Luther King. And thinking about the young people that did have a Martin Luther King, they were able to take from his example. He had the courage to do something. He was willing to go to jail, and I think that was and he had a vision of the future that gave somebody dignity, both the vision and a way to struggle that gave you dignity. And so I think that gave the rest of us an avenue to pursue struggle. And let's take Huey P. Newton, for example, who came after King's assassination, this repressive counter-revolution. In a certain sense, I do feel that he tried to say, we're going to meet violence with the appropriate response, in his own words. But in that time, it was organized and it was for justice. And it did take up arms. And even that was destroyed. And the only example that young people, I feel, have right now is what they might feel is an appropriate and equivalent response to what's wrong. But even less so now, because the extent to which, let's say, the United States government is destructive and repressive, there is no response to that on their terms that can remediate injustice. I don't think there's an equivalent response for, let's say, dropping bombs on children of Iran for a young person to meet what the injustice of, let's say, the government on their level. I feel that we need something that rises above what currently exists of injustice. And so that's why I feel that we need Martin Luther King now more than ever. And once again, I don't think, and you can't tell young people or anybody with a right mind consciousness what to do. I feel like that example of being a Martin Luther King Jr., in whatever capacity we have, is needed now more than ever.
John?
Hi, everyone. Speaking of John, reflecting on what we saw from the Birmingham campaign, it made me think about the media and people's take on using children in that capacity. And like my first thought was, people say they want to protect young people, but what are we protecting them from? Like in this land of over-policing, predators in the highest level of government, for-profit prisons. I don't see how leaving youth on the sidelines is protection at this point. I think when I think of the youth, I think they see a worldwide crisis of legitimacy. A lack of role models who consistently stand for what's moral and human rather than, capital, the status quo, and narcissistic self-interest. I think the youth, I get a feeling that's like a similar through line to a necessity to harness the revolutionary potential of the youth and young people in the U.S. and globally. Just as there is a need to empower impoverished Black populations in the U.S., as we move away from systems of oppression to ones where we are human beings. And I see this challenge as existential threat. As the globe and through the use of social media is further ensnared in white supremacist algorithms and authoritarian movements, if we fail to activate, support, and uplift these groups, they will be weaponized against us. In saying that, I think of church congregations that recently in Michigan and Wisconsin supported pro-data center and genocide supporting candidates. And the youth, young men and women without work, friends, opportunity, and hope, sitting in their basements, being told and internalizing hate for immigrants and other members of the working class, for their inability to achieve a justice system.
So we have John, not John. Cesar, James, Brother East, back to Gerard and Cindy. Anyone? Richard. And then, so we'll start with Cesar.
Hey everyone, so listening to this conversation, I thought that maybe I want to caution on that, seen so much happen here, but in general, when talking about young people and children, I heard a lot said about not being condescending to younger generations and not being patronizing to them, and I agree. But I also want to caution against forms of idealism, conception, or preconceived notions as to what children and people ought to be or how they are right now. Instead of actually studying the material conditions and then using that to determine whether or not and how and what ways they interface with revolutionary consciousness or not. And I say that because I organize a lot of young people in general. So it is true that young people tend to have a more uncompromising, sometimes moral compass that we've talked about. But I do think there are really valid and reasons for that. I have organized with young people, older people in general, but material conditions, this capitalism crisis generates so many problems and contradictions in oneself that it's a really demobilizing thing. And I see a lot of people that are, already in their 40s or 50s, older than myself in their 30s. They get to a point where you have a lot of student debt, working, living paycheck to paycheck, you might have a family you're trying to support. All those things, all those contradictions are very demobilizing, and they lead to people not being activated, or maybe having those, being more compromising their positions that maybe you wouldn't expect from a younger person. But that is not something that's unique to older generations at all or adults. And young people are not immune to that. I've seen a lot of young people already be demobilized by the conditions that they're living in right now. So when you're going to college and then you graduate and you face a job market that makes your degree almost completely worthless, you can't find anything after half a year of applying to jobs. when you have to take on hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to begin with. When you're a child, your parents can't be you can't get expenses because living paycheck to paycheck, and you're encouraged to maybe take a part-time job and help focus into your community or like your friends, or like your schooling. There are so many reasons right now why young people are also becoming increasingly deactivated, and I think that's something we need to understand and grapple with and confront, because otherwise we risk losing a generation to apathy and nihilism. I have 4 younger siblings, and the youngest of my siblings, she's in high school, she's a sophomore. She's gonna be a sophomore this fall. And I asked her about like, because I like, so how are people in your generation, in your classes? I feel like there's a lot going on. There's the war in Gaza, in Iran, and there's all this stuff happening here on health. How are you guys confronting it, or how are you guys answering the question regularly? How is your generation dealing with it, or trying to resist, or what have you? And her response is overwhelmingly that there's a lot of apathy and nihilism. Young people aren't being asked. They're increasingly being left out because you have your future is being taken away from you in front of you, and if you don't have a social program, an alternative, or some kind of social theory of change that can give you like something to do to make that world better, to make your future better, you're paralyzed. Or you get pushed into these extremes, like these hopefully like terribly radical extremes. Like she talks about how many young men that she's been in classes have like taken to the rhetoric of Andrew Tate and the take this whole manosphere stuff, because that's something that's happening right now. It's going very viral. It's a very right-wing fascist way of trying to teach young men that your issues are because of women and diversity of a number of other things instead of the capitalist crisis we have today. So if you can present them with a social program or a way of actually engaging with a revolution, with like revolutionary consciousness that helps them see like a path that they can participate in for like the future to make their future better, they're not going to just be magically activated. They're going to be demobilized. They do have a capacity right now to be more uncompromised in those positions, but that is not a given. That's just a result of the material conditions. And if that gets worse, that will change. And so I only bring that up because what I see in this reading by Martin Luther King Jr. is that in Birmingham, he confronted that straight up. He not only taught them, like, this is something we can do, they don't presented them a social theory of change that could lead to a better future. He connected their struggles, talked about how you don't want to go die to also war abroad when you have so much going on at home. He reached out to them, organized them directly, actively engaged them, and that's what brought them to participate in Birmingham in like massive numbers. It wasn't just an abstract moral compass or like this, like it is a little conditions, but they also had to be engaged directly for that to happen. That's not going to happen sporadically. Don't have to be taken on that possibly build. So I just wanted to say this.
Okay. 1 second, there's a couple of individuals. But Trina, you want to respond directly? Is that okay?
Thank you for sharing that, because what came up for me when you were sharing that was thinking about the children of Birmingham were largely segregated. They weren't as interwoven with white America and other groups at the time in a globally connected world. So that I wonder to what degree how that has impacted maybe some of this, what you're describing here. So again, the question that remains for me is, to understand what the revolution is going to look like today, we really need to unpack a little bit about their lives and their experience and what it is that they are fighting for.
Sure. Okay. 1 moment. I think James, you had raised your hand earlier.
Yeah. Everyone, James, I'm a community developer. Means, like I said, talk about these ideas from an asset-based approach. So like I said, strengths earlier. So that's how I'm constantly thinking that way. And I love how the conversation has progressed. We moved from one element to the other element, and I think it's headed in a very good direction. I think earlier on you brought up the war that we're facing, and it makes me think about how long has that been? How long has that conversation been, and what are the waves of that conversation? And then I started thinking about when Sherman Michael said after the election how we are headed for a nadir, right? And it made me think about what do you do in that phase of the war? And it's preparation and foundation setting. because you may not be able to fully engage in the fight at that time. You may have to recoup because of all the damages that you have experienced directly or indirectly, right? But at that time of that downward trend, you're still prepping, you're still preparing the foundation, you're still helping to raise the consciousness. So like in terms of, do we need another Dr. King? It would be wonderful. But at the same time, we need multiple kings so that there's a new level set of how we face and individuals in whatever injustice they face in their everyday, they face it with new energy, with new intellect, with new power. So in terms of laying that foundation and creating the opportunities that could lead to another type of Birmingham, we have to constantly focus on things like this, educating young people in the community wherever we can, so that as the opportunity comes, the children can run into the gap. And then we as adults can be brave enough to allow them to do that. And so that's where my mind is. I think that's the opportunity. And then, so like, you know, one of the cool things is like the evolution of hip hop. I'm not the biggest student of hip hop, but just in understanding how the music has traveled, become this platform in multiple ways, despite how people have tried to co-opt and change it and commercialize it, how it's become this way of language conveyance for so many young people to express themselves. And so as we continue to educate and help people to understand these things and teach the history, I feel like we are creating a foundation that will lead to the opportunity for the children to really contribute their energy to the revolution. So that's fine.
Brother, let's get Brother East since he hasn't spoken yet.
So look around, get about advocating for years ago, we talked about at least 2,000 years of mental energy split out. What is risking in collective genius that people are talking about? Talk about Marvin Gaye, a song called Taking Children Up, you know this song. We got a world that's destined to die. Who really cares if any world is destined to die? We made a statement about 6 cycle. That way on about who we are in terms of world history. Talking about Somali. Some about Somali, you most of all, fratricide for my children in America. Black on black crime in this country nationwide, versus any war going on. Got to be addressed by the churches. Why? Like application talk about Dr. King. This spirit is here, even access. Resurrection. The spirit is right here. What would he say? What would he do? It's alive right now in every one of us. Now from all of us. It's not, it's a human rights stuff we got. This council of beautiful people right now, world people all over the planet. I've heard very some evidence to in men. Right? See the real man. Yeah. Right now. Right now. One thing is missing. Young.
What was
No,
it?
young people here.
Okay, I have a response to you, but keep going.
So one young boy came to the gentleman. If you don't do anything, say like you. Like everybody, next week, you bring a young person. Now we had to fall, we had to go touch down in the end zone. That's been done. Right? Bring somebody young. This means that's something God said. That this meeting grows to be something.
Yeah.
So I have a response very quickly, is that I think exactly what you're saying is that there are many non-children in here, and we've encouraged everyone to bring their children, the children in their lives, to a forum like this, because we do believe that this is the revolutionary culture that should be imbued among youth today. And yes, today we may not have children in this room, but actually many of us were children coming into free school. And so when we were saying save the children, there's actually some children here that have been saved because of this idea, of these ideas. And I say this to say, you know, many of us coming into free school were apolitical, were children of immigrants, taught to succeed, get a job, get an education, don't care about war, don't care about poverty in the city. But that did something to our souls, and many of us were dying inside. And so I think part of it is that, okay, maybe a couple of us are a little bit older, but actually many of us are in this room, we're children not too long ago. And we're going through very terrible things in our lives. And so I think this is a testimony to what you're saying, which is that I think what is it that children need today when there's so much poverty and war in the world that oftentimes for children, they just tune out, or, well, they destroy things, turn to violence, or they tune out and they don't listen to anyone. And I think what we're trying to offer is that path, which is you come from a history of struggle. There's a way to make sense of the poverty and violence and everything in the city, and then also to develop a capacity in which you are able to be part of that. And I think part of the testimonies for those that are in free school is that, you know, from people who are apolitical, from people who, you know, didn't really care, to trying to figure out a way with the people in this room and with the people of Philadelphia of what do we do? But I think that's my quick, not so quick answer to you. But you're. Mm-hmm.
Everybody's revolutionary, but we need to be solutionary.
But the risk to that is you find quick solutions and not the ones that actually address the root of what the issues are. But okay, let's move on because there's a couple of individuals.
We also have to end. So.
Yes.
No, this is the point.
Yes.
We talked about children, sure, many of us have been children and grew up with this particular ideology, right? But bring your children was his point. Right. So I'm not speaking for them, but I don't want us to miss that.
Yeah,
right?
and
Because just like in not disrespecting that has been stated, in that same right, we have all been teenagers. Right? We have all been youth, we have all been children, so we can speak from that perspective based on our own lived experience in order to come up with certain solutions. I hear what you're saying, but I still don't want you to miss that.
No, and so that's why my response was that bring your children because.
I get it, right. I just want you to make sure that point was heard.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
I get it.
All right. We will move on because we have to wrap up, and I think there's a couple. Okay, so final three: Gerard, Sandeep, and Richard. But is there anyone who? Okay, Gerard.
I'm gonna make this really quick, and I got to respond myself. I think there's some really good things to say. I feel like because of neoliberalism and this like colorblind ideology that's like made everybody have a mental lobotomy, we're not being able to see that we're still in a state of war on Black life. In the sense that if you look at what happened during slavery, that was a mode of governance. So you would have pedophiles and white supremacist forms attacking children. The Black experience has just been universalized across the world, where now, because of the economic base of how people got disenfranchised and treated, it's going to come back up again. This is why people in Iran having to deal with it. Now they have to deal with techno-fascism and fucking Elon bombing people with Palantir. In this similar type of form, I feel like everybody's kind of coming to a conclusion, is a decentralization of state power. So before in the past, when the Maroons might attack somebody, it was easier because the hegemon would be like on a physical partition. So with like, for example, Penn, for example, they have lots of branch campuses. Everything is more branch and web-like now, which makes it harder to theorize against because the lines of enemy and friend have been too blurred. So what I would say maybe is the goal is probably seeing like the Black experience is we're still in a state of war. people are still getting hanged. There are still gun violence that's caused where blackness is still seen as a sight of war. You were not just forced to pick cotton. Now you're the whore for the fucking mass, the prison complex. You have now became what they want to extract themselves. Because now, oh, you're free. No, you're so disenfranchised. You're so deindustrialized. Now we're going to capture you. So this is how hoods become sites of extraction where people now have to go live through that. So, you know, I just want to say something specifically with the kids. The kids see that in terms of when they see cops in their neighborhood. They might not see an imperial force, but they're going to see you mistreat my brother. You mistreat my aunt. My aunt has to slave for the rent. It's just transition. But what's kind of happening is the intelligentsia has to also meet them where they are to be able to see for themselves that we're fighting a very similar enemy.
Okay, we'll wrap up with Sandeep and Richard.
Yeah, and maybe earlier when I was speaking, misunderstood was people and misunderstood. But that's what I was talking about in this guy's spoke. We have to be adopted. And that's what I chose to do in my solution, my area of specialty is STEM. So I go to the black students at Penn, Drexel, Villanova, wherever that is, they have chapters. And I help them with their current needs because they don't want to hear about Dr. King and that entire history, the 1900s. They need help in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering classes, and all the math and science and calculus that goes into it. So I help them with their current needs. And then I bring in the very reason why I'm helping whole human struggle, Gandhi, King, E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, whose name Brian, all the people that were murdered for the human struggle. That is my solution, and that's what I was trying to get across. Using stress, using our intellect. You know, so you said engineering, no, yeah, engineering is one avenue. We all have to be done. We all have to be done. We all have to be those. Because that's the only way we're going to reach these kids that realize capitalism is the only way. It's not. We know that it's not. But we got to give them the jobs. Let's give them the jobs and let's teach them why you now got this. Now, why not say, take care of this black student because I push him to it? Because he's capable.
Lockheed's not a great example.
Why do you want to have to work at Lockheed?
No, I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, go
We
ahead.
need to help them so they get in.
Yeah.
Once they get in, we're also educating them. on the
One
social
second,
issues.
because I think Samir wanted to quickly respond.
I want to respond to you, Sandeep, and to you, Gerard. I don't agree with you, Sandeep. I don't agree with you. Kids, yes, jobs are important. But what's happening in the world today is, to Gerard's point, these kids might not have a job in the future because of where AI is going. The ruling class is trying to make the Black experience universal and to denigrate labor. And they're trying to de-skill labor, taking away skilled labor by giving them AI, making all labor denigrated. Yes, having an engineering, I'm an IT professional, that's important. But my real education is when I come here on Saturdays, when I go to Mosque 12 on Sundays, and I get a moral education. When I get a moral education from Dr. Montero, it reminds me of what W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in Galileo Galilei. Yes, science is a worthy mistress, but there is one greater, humanity. But it's not about training them. But it's not training. But it's not about training for education, for engineering or STEM. There's lots of places or any field, art. There has to be a moral component. That's what makes.
And we bring in that moral component.
No. That's where I disagree with the order.
Order priority.
And even, well, I guess the quick example, and then I'll pass it to you, Richard, real quick. I have a friend who's in civil engineering. She went to school with me, and the thing is, civil engineering has become so unfulfilling for her because the country itself is not really building bridges, infrastructure, whatever it is. And so we're telling people to become engineers and then they become paper pushers. But sometimes I think because, my family is from China, where they are building bridges and civil engineers are part of the peace economy. But the problem with something like Raytheon or whichever, Lockheed Martin, is that you train engineers to support a war economy. And I think that's a lot of, and that's the issue. And I think we can revisit this at another day because we do need to wrap up. And we want to make sure Richard gets a chance to speak.
I just want to say I'm like stuck with your question. How are the children fighting? And I'm thinking of Black Philadelphia. I'm thinking of Black Philadelphia specifically. I'm always thinking about Black Philadelphia. That's that's it. And I also I cannot want to repeat myself in the sense of there's one group of Black Philadelphia parents that came out when he said, but Dad, I made my pledge. Those Black Philadelphia parents are not revolutionary. They are structure in Philadelphia. They think they're doing good. They are even not making working wage income. And that's a different group that we have to acknowledge that are influencing young people. Then it's the other group that he said, our people were demonstrating daily and going to jail in numbers. But we were still beating our heads against the brick wall of the city official stuff. Those were adults that young people were seeing engaged in revolutionary struggle that they could emulate, that they were willing to go to those classes, to be trained by, to be able to make a pledge and then make a commitment to come out. But in Philadelphia today, do we have those adults who are engaged in that type of activity and willing to make those levels of a sacrifice?
Right.
For young people to be able to say, that's who I want, because they are mobilizing. I mean, the police are running them from downtown, telling them, get out of the park. And then we got Black police officers, they're not white, Black police officers who are on bikes, who are, telling them to move. So I guess that's the point that's like sticking to me, and the structure is not changing. The business community is still the business community from 1963 to now. We can look at downtown. The development of downtown compared to the development of business district in North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, they're not the same, and the evolution of that. So as I positioned in the last, the social culture that came up out of the KKK, or whether you call it the neoliberal group, or whether you call it the right, that cultural group still exists today. So when we say things are changed, they're not structured. They have not changed. They are racial capitalists then, they're racial capitalists now. They are racist then, culturally, and they're calling that racial nationalists now. And I made a note that senators, when there's supposed to be a horror film. Who was the monster? Was it the vampire or was it the KKK? Who was the monster? And in '63, who was the monster? The people who put the bombs or the police? We got to be real about how much things has changed, that young people, like us adults, are too afraid to make a move right now because we don't know what we're going to be confronted with, or we're already accommodating what it is and said, well, we just be practical and get a job.
Did you want to? Well, I just wanted to say that I was listening to the whole conversation, and I'm really appreciative of how far we've moved in this conversation, how we've just brought it back to this essential question. And the only reason we're stopping is because we're at time, and not because we necessarily feel like this conversation is over. These are all questions, I think, that take more than one conversation to also address.
And I'm really glad that we have been able to pull so much together. But I also kept hearing a lot of things that make me think about how we're going to continue the conversation next week here, next Saturday, because next week's topic is nonviolence, the weapon that heals. Like, what was the nature of those trainings that those young people attended to prepare them to face the jails, the police dogs, but also understand their role in that struggle. And then on the flip side, like, what is the nature of the way that we can understand young people's capacity for nonviolent resistance today? I actually think that's a very worthy question for us to continue next week, because I do think that there was, like, I heard many things around like a theory for change or the kind of preparation that we need in this time to understand this moment and our role in it. And I think nonviolence is also this thing that I heard kind of as this this layer underneath our entire conversation. What made it possible for those young people to resist in the ways that they did? And I think the question comes back to now, because it's so urgent, like, what is the way in which we have to, just because nonviolence also, one of the first steps is also an interrogation, an investigation, understanding the facts at hand. I think that was also a piece I heard a lot. And I think that comes first before the trainings and the, like, what happens when someone hits you or comes at you with violence. But all those things fit together into a larger philosophy and tactic for nonviolent resistance that I think we're trying to work out in the 21st century here in Philadelphia. And so I'm really excited for next week. I'm really excited for everyone to come back. And if you have not yet already, there's a sign-in sheet for when we are going to send out that information for what we're going to read and listen to next. Also sending you all this recording from today and any other supplementary readings as well. So thank you all for coming so much.